There is a moment that happened inside a memorial service in London that nobody in that room was prepared for. Not the palace officials who had spent months planning every detail of that day, not the senior royals who have spent their entire lives learning how to hold their faces still in public, not even William himself, who has been training for rooms like that one since he was old enough to understand what a camera pointed at his family actually means. What George did lasted about 30 seconds, and it broke his father in a way that nothing else had managed in nearly 30 years. This is that story. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss where this ends up. I am Harold. I spend my time going through everything that moves around this family. The records, the inquiry documents, the reporting that got buried before anybody finished asking questions. And what you are about to hear is me putting the pieces together the way I read them, not a palace press release. The last thing William said before he walked out of that building was 4 words long and was spoken quietly, to nobody in particular, in an empty corridor. And those 4 words are the whole story. The weight William has carried since he was 15. Because you cannot understand the man without him. On the 6th of September 1997, William Wales was 15 years old. He put on a dark suit and walked through the streets of central London behind his mother's coffin while the entire world watched. 1 billion people. Flowers 10 feet deep outside the gates. A silence so complete you could hear the horses and nothing else. People talk about that walk endlessly. The composure of it. The stillness of his face. What they forget is what he already knew when he took that first step. He was not walking behind her coffin as a boy who did not understand what had happened. Diana had sat him down, told him there were 3 people in that marriage, explained, as carefully as she could to a child old enough to need the truth and young enough to be destroyed by it, that his father had been in love with another woman for years. He knew what Camilla Parker Bowles was before the country had finished debating whether to say her name on television. He knew about the isolation, the stripping away of her protection, the way the institution had closed around her until nobody was left standing with her. He knew about the letter she wrote to her solicitor in October of 1995, 2 years before she died, where she stated she believed her husband was planning to have her killed in a staged car accident. He knew she had written those words. He knew she had died in a car. A 15-year-old boy, carrying all of that, walking in a straight line with his face completely still. He made a promise that day, not out loud, not to anyone who could confirm it, but every decision he has made in the 30 years since points back to the same place. Watch what he does with it. The memorial that almost didn't happen. The planning for the memorial took longer than the official version of events suggests, and the reason it took longer is the reason every meaningful thing involving Diana's memory inside those palace walls takes longer than it should. There was resistance. Not from Charles, who has spent the years since his cancer diagnosis in a kind of quiet reckoning with everything he got wrong. Not from Anne, who never needed to be persuaded of anything where Diana was concerned, and who has been the most consistent and the most quietly ferocious defender of Diana's place in that institution across the last 3 decades. The resistance came from the place it always comes from, the instinct inside the senior household to manage Diana's memory rather than honor it, to calibrate it, to make sure that any formal recognition of who she was and what she meant did not become a referendum on how she was treated while she was alive, or who treated her that way, or what that treatment ultimately produced. There is a particular kind of palace thinking that specializes in tributes that say everything and mean nothing. It has been applied to Diana for going on 30 years, and William had watched it operate for every single one of them. The carefully worded anniversary statements, the approved photographs released on the anniversaries of her birthday and her death, chosen for the warmth they communicated rather than the truth they told. The patronages kept at arm's length. The portrait, sitting in a Windsor storage room for over 20 years, while the world outside those walls kept putting her face on magazine covers and memorial stamps and the front of every book written about the modern monarchy. He had done something about the portrait already. That had been the first move, and it had been the one everybody saw. Diana's official portrait coming out of storage and going up on the Hall of Matriarchs wall beside Queen Elizabeth. The legal groundwork laid so carefully over so many months that by the time Camilla found out it had happened, there was not one mechanism available to her to reverse it. Not one call she could make. Not one door she could open. The frame was on the wall, and it was staying there, and everybody in that building understood it. The memorial was the second move, and it was harder to execute than the portrait, for reasons that have nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with politics. A portrait on a wall is a statement that cannot speak. A memorial service is a living thing. It has a guest list, and a program, and a speaker, and an order of precedence. It requires decisions about who stands where, and who is invited, and what is said out loud in a room full of people and cameras. Every one of those decisions is a negotiation, and in a household where Camilla's comfort has functioned as an unofficial veto on anything connected to Diana for the better part of 3 decades, getting a memorial across the line in a form that actually meant something required William to fight for it in ways that never appeared in any official announcement. He fought quietly, the way he fights everything, through institutional channels, through precedent, through the same method he had used on the portrait, which is making the thing so procedurally sound that opposing it becomes its own kind of statement. Camilla was not invited. That was not announced. Nobody wrote a press release about her absence, but the guest list was what it was, and she was not on it, and every person in that building understood exactly what that absence said. She had spent 25 years being the reason Diana's memory was managed at a careful distance. She did not get to sit in the front row of the day her stepson had spent 2 years building to undo it. The program was William's. The speakers were William's choices. The music was Diana's. Not a curated selection of what the palace communications team felt was appropriately celebratory. The actual music she loved. The songs described by the people who knew her as the ones she sang in the car and danced to in her kitchen and played quietly on the nights when she had sent the staff home and was alone in the rooms that were supposed to be hers. It was, by every account, from people who were in that room before a single guest arrived, one of the most precisely and personally considered memorial services that building had ever seen. Not because of the grandeur of it, because of the accuracy, because somebody who had actually known her had been in charge of deciding how she was remembered for the first time since she died. And then George walked in. What nobody knew about George. There is a version of this story that presents George's moment as spontaneous, unrehearsed, a child acting on pure instinct in a charged room, and some of that is true. The instinct was real, the spontaneity was real, but instinct like that does not come from nowhere. It comes from years of careful, deliberate, loving preparation that never looked like preparation from the outside because it was never supposed to. William and Catherine made a decision before George was old enough to form a memory of his own. They decided that Diana was going to be part of his life, not as a national icon, not as the people's princess that the newspapers had canonized and simplified and turned into a greeting card, as a woman, as his grandmother, as the specific and complicated and extraordinary person she actually was, who had loved her sons in a way that had broken every rule about how royal mothers were supposed to love their children, and had paid for it, and had never once stopped doing it anyway. The photographs came first. There are pictures of Diana in the private areas of every home William and Catherine have shared, not the official portraits. the real ones. Diana in a swimming pool with Harry on her shoulders, laughing with her whole face in the way that royal women were specifically trained not to do in public. Diana at a hospital bed, holding a patient's hand with no gloves on, at a time when that gesture made front pages because the fear around it was so profound. Diana on the floor, playing with her boys, completely undignified, completely present, completely herself. George grew up looking at those pictures. He grew up asking about them. And William answered every question, not with the edited version that palace press offices produce, with the truth, calibrated to what a child could hold at each age, but always moving toward the full picture rather than away from it. He told George about the warmth of her, the directness of her, the way she had walked into hospitals that other royals flew past in motorcades and sat down on the floor with children who were frightened and made them feel as though they were the most important person she had ever met, because in that moment, they were. He told him about her courage, not the word courage as it appears in official biographies, sanded smooth and positioned carefully. The specific courage of a woman who understood that the institution she had married into was actively working against her, and who kept showing up anyway, because she had decided that the people she served mattered more than her own survival inside those walls. He told George, when the boy was old enough, about what had been done to her memory after she died. The portrait in storage, the flowers burned, the bedroom locked, the patronages quietly deprioritized. He told him not to produce anger, but to produce understanding. Because William believes that a king who does not understand what that institution is capable of has no chance of being better than the one that came before him. George listened to all of it. He is 13 now, and he's been listening for years. He knows who his grandmother was, with a depth and a specificity that most of the public never will, because most of the public got the magazine cover version. George got the real one, from the only person left alive who could give it to him, and on the morning of the memorial, he carried all of it into that room. The morning of the memorial. The car journey from Kensington Palace to the venue was quiet, in the way that car journeys are when something important is waiting at the end of them, and everybody in the vehicle already knows it. George sat beside his father. Charlotte and Louis were with Catherine, and William, who has spent his entire adult life reading the faces of his children the way his mother taught him to read rooms, looked at his eldest son and saw something that stopped him. George was not nervous. That was the thing. William had expected nerves. He had half expected to spend the journey managing them, talking the boy through it, the way Catherine usually talks their children through things, low and steady and completely convincing even when she herself is running on almost nothing. He had been prepared for that conversation. It was not the conversation that happened. George was thinking, not anxiously, deliberately, the way he thinks when he has already made a decision about something and is running through the shape of it one more time before the moment arrives. William recognized the look because he has seen it in his own mirror. He asked his son what was on his mind, and George told him he was thinking about her, not about the ceremony, not about where to stand, or what the order of service said, or how to hold his face when the cameras were on him, which is the conversation William had genuinely been bracing for, about her. He said he had been thinking about what she would have done if she had been the one organizing the day, and then he said something that William told Catherine about that evening, quietly, after the children had gone to bed, in the specific tone he uses when something has hit him so hard that he needs to say it out loud before he can figure out what to do with it. George said he thought she would have spent the whole morning worrying about whether the people coming to remember her were going to be all right, that she would have been more focused on the guests than on herself, that she would have been moving through the room before it started, checking in, noticing the people on the edges, the ones who looked as though they were holding something difficult, and going to them first. He said it the way 13-year-olds say the wisest things, which is as though he was just describing something obvious that he had worked out, rather than producing in one sentence an understanding of his grandmother that most journalists who spent their careers writing about Diana never quite reached. William said nothing for a moment. He looked out of the window. Catherine, who was watching him from across the car, saw his jaw tighten and then release, and understood immediately what had just happened, and said nothing either, because there was nothing to say. They arrived. They got out. The doors opened, and the day began. The moment. The service had been running for perhaps 40 minutes when it happened. The room was full. Full in the way that a room is full when every person in it has brought their own private version of the person being remembered, and all of those versions are sitting alongside each other in the same space, without any of them quite matching, and the music is doing the work that words cannot. One of Diana's closest friends had spoken, a woman who had been in the room with her at the lowest points of the years before her death, who had sat with her in the spaces the institution had not yet found to take away from her, and who had spoken about her with the specificity and the love of somebody describing a real person rather than a symbol. It was the best tribute William had heard in all the years of memorial services and anniversary statements and careful palace-approved commemorations. Because it was true. Because it sounded like her. George had been sitting upright, attentive, with his face in the correct arrangement for a formal royal occasion. He is 13, and he has been learning that face since he was old enough to sit through a service without being carried out. But his eyes had been doing something different from his face. His eyes had been moving around the room the way William's eyes move around a room, taking inventory, noting who was where, reading the temperature of the space, and at some point during the tribute, George's eyes landed on an elderly woman in the fourth row who was not managing. She was not crying openly. She was doing something harder than that, which was trying not to. Her hands were pressed together in her lap. Her shoulders were drawn in. She had the look of somebody who is holding themselves together through considerable effort and is not entirely sure the effort is going to be enough. George watched her for a moment. Then he stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically. He stood, the way you stand when you have made a quiet decision and are carrying it out without making a performance of it. He moved along the row, past the knees of the people between him and the aisle, excused himself in a whisper that the people immediately around him heard, and nobody further away did, stepped into the aisle, walked 4 rows forward, and sat down in the empty seat beside the elderly woman. He did not say anything immediately. He sat with her for a moment in the way Diana used to sit with people, not performing care, just being present with somebody who needed presence more than they needed words. And then he leaned slightly toward her and said something quietly that nobody else in the room heard. Whatever it was, the woman's hands came apart. Her shoulders dropped about half an inch, and she turned to look at him with an expression that the people who could see it from nearby have struggled to describe without stopping halfway through the sentence. He stayed with her for the rest of that portion of the service. He came back to his seat before the next speaker began, as quietly as he had left it. He did not look around to see who had noticed. He sat back down and returned his attention to the front of the room as though he had simply stepped out for a moment. William had seen every second of it. William's reaction. The thing about watching your child do something extraordinary is that the extraordinary part lands twice. It lands in the moment, as you are watching it, and then it lands again almost immediately after, when you understand what you are actually looking at. And the second landing is always the harder one. William saw George stand up. He saw him move along the row. He tracked him down the aisle and into the fourth row and into the seat beside the elderly woman, and he understood within about 15 seconds what his son was doing and why he was doing it. And then the second landing hit him, because he was not watching a 13-year-old perform a kind gesture at a public event. He was watching his mother walk across a room. He was watching the specific instinct that had made Diana the most beloved royal of her entire generation, the one that found the person on the edges of every room, the frightened one, the grieving one, the one who was trying hardest not to be noticed, and went directly to them without making it about itself. He was watching that instinct in the body of his son, in a room full of people who had come to honor the woman it belonged to, on a day that he had spent 2 years building precisely so that she would be properly remembered. His face did not break, not in the sense that it became visible to the room. He is too well trained for that, and 30 years of practice does not switch off in an instant. But Catherine, sitting beside him, felt his hand find hers and grip it in a way that was different from his usual grip. And she did not look at him. She looked straight ahead, the way you look straight ahead when the person beside you needs you to not make a thing of it. She just held on. Afterwards, when the service had ended, and the room had begun the slow and gentle business of people finding each other and saying the things memorial services cause people to say. William stood for a moment in a corridor just off the main room with one member of his household team, a man who has been with him long enough to be trusted with something unguarded. He did not make a speech. He did not produce an analysis. He said one thing, and he said it while looking at the middle distance, rather than at the person he was saying it to, which is what he does when the sentence is real rather than managed. He said that the boy had never met her, and that it had not mattered at all. Then he straightened up, put his face back into the arrangement the day required, and walked back into the room. Anne was watching. Princess Anne does not miss things. It is possibly the most important fact about her, if you are trying to understand how she moves through that family. She has spent 70 years in an institution built on the art of the managed impression, which means she has had 70 years of practice at seeing past it. She knows what a performance looks like, and she knows what is real, and she does not confuse the two, not ever, and not for anyone. She had been standing near the wall on the far side of the room when George moved. She saw the whole thing from a slightly different angle than William. She saw it without the weight of being his father, which meant she could see the shape of it more clearly than the man for whom the shape of it was almost too much to look at directly. Anne has known what that boy carries since before he was born. She was in the family when Diana arrived. She watched what happened to her. She watched what happened to Diana's memory afterward, the erasure done in small pieces over years, the portrait in the dark, the bedroom locked, the flowers burned. She was one of the 2 people who stood in the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor on the night Diana's portrait came home, and stayed in that room after it was done, and said quietly, almost to herself, in a sentence that has been repeated ever since by the staff who heard it, that Diana belongs here. And she always did. She is not a sentimental woman. That needs to be said clearly, because what follows could be mistaken for sentiment, and it was not. After the service, when the room had thinned and the formal part of the day was finished, and people were moving toward the door, Anne found William. She did not make it an occasion. She did not give a speech. She put her hand briefly on his arm, in the way she touches people when she means something and does not want it performed. And she said 7 words. She said that George is going to be just fine. From Anne, in that context, on that day, those 7 words carry a weight that most speeches never reach, because Anne does not offer reassurance. She is not built for it. She offers assessments, and her assessment, delivered in 7 words with her hand on her nephew's arm, in a room where his mother had just been honored for the first time properly since her death, was that the thing William has spent his whole life trying to protect and perpetuate and carry forward through sheer force of his own will is not going to need his will much longer. It is already in the next person. William said nothing back. He nodded once, and Anne moved on. the way Anne always moves on, without looking back to see what the moment produced, because she already knew. What it means for the monarchy. William is building George Wales is 13 years old. He is going to be king. And those two facts, held together in the same sentence, tend to produce a particular kind of thinking in people who observe this institution, which is the thinking about preparation, about what is being done to get him ready, about the curriculum and the schedule, and the gradual expansion of his public duties and the speech he will one day give at his own investiture. That is not the right thinking for this story. What happened in that memorial room has nothing to do with preparation. It cannot be taught. It cannot be scheduled or instilled through a program of royal engagements, or refined through years of receiving lines and state visits and charity events attended on behalf of the crown. What George did was feel the room and respond to what he found in it. He found a woman who was in pain in a place where she expected to be invisible, and he went to her. He did not check whether it was the correct thing to do. He did not look to his parents for permission or guidance. He simply stood up, the way his grandmother used to stand up in every room she ever entered when she saw somebody who needed her. And he went. William has said in public on more than one occasion that the thing he wants most for his children is for them to understand service the way Diana understood it. Not the performance of service, not the ribbon cutting and the motorcades and the gracious wave from the steps of a building. The real thing. The thing that requires you to notice another person so completely that your own position in the room becomes irrelevant for a moment. He has said it in interviews and in speeches and in the careful language of a man who has thought about how to pass something precious to the next generation without turning it into a slogan. And what he saw in that room was the evidence that it had worked. Not because of anything he said in any interview, because of the 20 photographs of his mother on the walls of every home his son has grown up in, because of the conversations he had with that boy over years, in cars and on walks, and at the end of school days, about who Diana was and what she believed and what she gave and what it cost her, because of the specific, deliberate, painstaking effort he made to give George a grandmother he had never met in enough detail and with enough honesty that the boy grew up knowing her. And then George walked into a room and demonstrated in about 30 seconds that he had been listening to every word of it. The monarchy William is building is smaller than the one he inherited. Fewer working royals, tighter, more accountable, harder to hide behind. He has been saying this for years and demonstrating it for years, and it is well underway. The question that nobody inside that institution has been willing to answer publicly is what it is built around, what sits at the center of the leaner, tighter thing he is constructing. That service gave you the answer. It is built around the principle that a royal's job is to find the person in the fourth row who is trying not to fall apart and go and sit with them. That is it. That is the whole thing. Diana understood it. Her son understood it watching her, even as a boy. And her grandson understood it without ever having met her. That continuity, invisible and unannounced and never scheduled, is the most significant thing about the future of that institution. And it announced itself in a memorial room in London without anybody in the press office knowing it was coming. The thing Diana would have said. There is a temptation at this point in a story like this one to give you a piece of sentiment, to tell you that Diana was watching from somewhere, and that she saw it, and that she would have been proud. That is not the honest version. The honest version is harder and more specific and considerably more useful. Diana Spencer was a woman who spent her life being underestimated by an institution that confused reserve with dignity and distance with strength. She was told, implicitly and sometimes explicitly, that the way she moved through rooms was too much, too direct, too emotional, too interested in the people she met rather than the impression she was supposed to make. She was told that what she was doing was not how things were done. She kept doing it anyway, because she had worked out something that the institution had not, which is that the people at the edges of official rooms, the ones nobody was going to photograph, the frightened patient and the isolated child, and the old woman holding herself together in the fourth row, those people mattered as much as anyone else in the building, and that going to them was not a distraction from the job. It was the job. She was punished for understanding that. Slowly, systematically, and without anyone ever having to say out loud that they were doing it. Because that is how that institution works when it wants to correct somebody. It does not confront. It reduces, piece by piece, quietly, in ways small enough that objecting to any single one of them makes you look unreasonable. But she was right. And the evidence that she was right is now 13 years old and attending school in Windsor, and still cannot sit completely still through a long ceremony, which is the one trait in him that she would have recognized before anyone else in the room did, and which would have made her laugh in the particular way she laughed when something delighted her all at once, with her whole face, undignified and completely real. What Diana would have said about George's 30 seconds in that memorial room is not something a press office would have written. It is something she would have said to him directly, probably kneeling down to be level with him so that the sentence landed on him rather than over him, the way she always made sure her words landed on the people she was speaking to. She would have told him that what he did mattered to that woman more than anything else that happened in that room that day. She would have told him that being the person who notices is the most important thing a person with his name and his future can ever be. And then she would have moved on to the next thing, because Diana never made people feel watched after she had helped them. She made them feel seen, which is different, and then she left them with it. William knows all of this. He has known it since he was 8 years old, and watching his mother work a room. And on the afternoon of that memorial service, he had the extraordinary experience of watching his son know it too, without being told, because knowing it had apparently become something that passes between them without words, like the color of their eyes, like the line of their jaw, like her. Here is where it all stands. Diana's portrait is on the wall at Windsor where it was always supposed to be. Her patronages are coming back. Her name is being spoken inside the palace with a frequency and a depth of respect that has not existed since before she died. The institution that spent 25 years managing her memory at a careful distance is now run by her son, and her son has made it very clear through his actions rather than his statements what kind of institution he intends it to be. Camilla still holds her title. She still walks beside Charles at state occasions, but the diary is thinner, and the staff is smaller, and the woman filling her spaces is Catherine, and the momentum of everything inside that building is running in a direction that has nothing to do with her, and that she has absolutely no mechanism to redirect. She has to walk past Diana every day now. On the wall she spent 25 years keeping her off. In a house she thought she had won. That is where she lives. Charles is managing his illness with the same stubborn, complicated, deeply private dignity he brings to everything, and he is watching his son reshape the institution around a set of values that Diana would have recognized, and that he himself failed to protect when she was alive and needed him to. Whether that costs him anything is a question only he can answer, and he has given no indication that he intends to answer it in public. Anne is exactly as she has always been, watching, filing things away, saying the precise true thing at the precise right moment, and then moving on without looking back. She said George is going to be just fine, and Anne does not say things she does not mean. William left that memorial building at the end of the day and walked to the car where his family was waiting. The corridor was empty except for one protection officer at the far end. He stopped for a moment before he pushed the door open, and he said 4 words, quietly, to nobody in particular, in the way people say true things when they finally stop managing them. He said she would have loved him. That is the whole thing. Not a statement, not a line prepared for anybody. A father standing alone in a corridor, 27 years after he walked behind her coffin, telling the empty air that his son would have been exactly the kind of person his mother loved best. She would have. That is the honest read. A boy who stands up in a room full of important people and walks to the woman in the 4th row who is trying not to fall apart. Diana spent her whole life being that boy. She was punished for it by the institution he is now inheriting, and he is going to be king. She did not live to know him, but she built the man who built the boy. And the boy carried her into that room as though he had known her every day of his life, because in every way that actually matters, he had. William was 15 years old when he made a promise she could no longer hear. He has spent 27 years keeping it. And on one afternoon in a memorial room in London, he watched his son begin to keep it too. That is what this family is now. That is what it is becoming. And if you were watching Diana's face on the wall at Windsor while that service was happening a few miles away, and if you are inclined to believe that the people we lose do not entirely leave the rooms they mattered in, then perhaps she was watching too. And perhaps she was doing exactly what George did, finding the person who needed her most and going to them first.